Hello everyone, and welcome to Errors and Exception Handling. So this will be just a general overview of some of the keywords and concepts on exception handling in Python and how to deal with errors in your code. Okay, so let's take a quick look at an example error. Here I have a cell where I said print single quote hello, and I forgot to put a single quote at the end of that. So if I try to run that cell, I get this syntax error. And it says EOL while scanning the string literal. And so that actually stands for end of line error while scanning the string literal. So this sort of syntax error is known as an exception, and it's specific enough for me to see that I had an error there. So what is an exception? It's a specific description of types of errors. So even if a statement or expression is syntactically correct, it may cause an error when you attempt to execute it. So a lot of these errors that are detected during execution are called exceptions. So if we go back, this syntax error is a type of exception. But what's interesting to note here is that the errors detected during execution that are called exceptions, they're not unconditionally fatal. And what that phrase means is that it won't have to break your entire code. You can have one of those exceptions occur, and with the right syntax, with try and except, which we'll learn about in just a second, you can actually have the rest of your code run. So this is where the try and except keywords come into play. So the basic terminology and syntax used to handle errors in Python is known as this try and the except statements. So the code which can cause an exception to occur can be put in a try block, and then the handling of that exception can be implemented into the except block of code. So as far as syntax, it looks a little something like this. You have a try statement, and then you have a block of code within that try statement block, and you do your operations here that you may suspect will throw up some sort of exception. Just like earlier we could have had that syntax error. So let's say I said try, and I would have put print single quote hello with no end there, and then I have an except statement. And it says except, and you can actually specify the specific exception you're looking out for. So in the last case, it would have been syntax error, that phrase. And you can say, if a syntax error shows up, then execute a certain block of code. And you can also check for multiple exceptions, maybe some other sort of error. And there's a whole list, and there's a link in the Jupyter Notebook to all the official exceptions in Python. But granted, you don't actually need to know the name of the exception. You can just say except colon, and then in the case of any exception, it'll run this block of code. And we'll go over this in more detail when we go to the live coding. After all your except statements, what you can have is an else. So if there is no exception, then execute what's in the else block. Okay, so the finally keyword. The finally keyword allows us to place code that will always be run even if there are exceptions. So the finally block of code, like I said, will be run regardless if there was an exception in the try code block. And so what that looks like is I can say try, some code block here, and due to any exception, you may skip this code, such as that print statement. So there's an error here, doesn't matter, finally I want you to execute the code block in the finally section of your code. And now you can combine all three keywords, try, except, finally, to make your code more robust to errors. So you can have a try block where you try to run some code where you think there may be an error, except to check for certain exceptions, and then finally, so even if there is an exception, I want you to run this code block, the finally code block. Okay. So I know that was quite a bit, but what we're going to do now is go over all those topics through some live coding sessions. All right, thanks, and I will see you there.